I moved into the apartment because I needed something cheap, quiet, and close to work. The complex was an older brick building on the edge of town, the kind with long hallways that always smelled faintly of dust and wet carpet. My unit sat at the very end of the third floor, facing a small courtyard that never got any sun. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. The walls were thin but manageable, and the heating system was ancient, the kind that rattled like loose bones whenever it kicked in. But on the 15th night, something changed. It was just past midnight when I heard it, coming from the return air vent above my bed. At first, it sounded like a faint scraping, like someone running a fingernail slowly along metal. I assumed it was mice, or maybe the old fan blades shifting as the temperature dropped. But the sound didn't behave like an animal. It was too rhythmic, too patterned. The scraping continued for 2 or 3 minutes, stopped abruptly, then started again, this time slower, like it was waiting for my reaction. I climbed onto the mattress and pressed my ear near the vent. The metal felt cold, but not cold like a draft, cold like something inside was pulling the warmth out of the room. I tapped the vent lightly, hoping to scare away whatever was in there. Instantly, the scraping stopped. Then, something tapped back, 3 slow taps. I jerked back so fast I almost fell off the bed. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call maintenance, but it was late and I didn't want to sound crazy. Instead, I dragged the bed away from the vent and slept on the couch, telling myself it was old pipes or the building settling. But the next night, the tapping returned, only this time it was accompanied by a low whisper. I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a voice filtered through 50 years of dust and metal. I turned the TV on and tried to drown it out. Didn't work. The voice grew sharper, like it had learned the frequency my ears couldn't ignore. And then, at around 2 a.m., it said something clear. It said, "My name," in a voice that sounded like my own. Not exactly like an echo, but like someone trying to copy the shape of my breath, the exact cadence of how I spoke. I froze. My muscles locked. I didn't move for a full minute. Then I unplugged the TV and dragged it under the vent because the noise felt like pressure on my skull. I slept on the opposite wall, curled up with my back against the door. The next morning, I called the building manager. He told me not to worry, that the vents were old and sometimes carried voices from other apartments. But the end unit had no connecting vent on that side. I checked. The return duct went straight up to the roof. No neighbors above me. No neighbors behind that wall. Nothing but the vent. On the 4th night, the voice didn't wait till after midnight. It started whispering the moment the sun went down, calling my name, breathing in this slow, broken rhythm that didn't sound human. I shoved towels under the vent. Didn't help. The whispering slipped through the fibers like a draft made of sound. I finally climbed up, unscrewed the grate, and shined my phone light inside. The duct stretched back into pitch-black darkness. Old dust hung in the air like floating ash. I leaned closer, too close, and the darkness shifted. Something retreated deeper inside the vent. Not scurrying, gliding. The dust didn't move like it should. It swirled inward as if pulled by breath. I almost dropped my phone. I slammed the grate shut screwed it back as fast as I could, and shoved a chair under it like that would stop anything. That night, the whispering became angry, or hungry, I couldn't tell. It didn't just whisper my name, it started describing my room, the blanket pattern, the chipped paint near the ceiling, the way I shivered each time it spoke. Every detail was perfect. It was watching me from inside the wall. I videotaped it trying to get proof, but whenever I hit record, the whispering sank into pure static, like my phone couldn't catch the sound. On the 7th night, it stopped whispering altogether. No tapping, no scraping, no breathing. Just silence, so heavy it sounded wrong, like the air was waiting for something. I barely slept. Every creak of the building felt like footsteps. Every gust of air felt like a hand on my shoulder. At 3:12 a.m., my phone lit up. Battery dead for hours, yet it powered on by itself. A notification flashed. Audio file saved. 3:12 a.m. I opened it. The recording was 30 seconds of darkness and vent sounds until the final 2 seconds. My own voice whispered, "I'm already in." Except I hadn't spoken. Not in hours, not since I had barricaded myself in the bathroom. I dropped the phone. It slid across the tile toward the door. Something on the other side clicked softly, like a fingernail tapping wood. The vent above the shower rattled gently, not violently, almost playfully, the way a cat paws at a door when it knows you're trapped inside. I didn't stay. I ran out barefoot, keys in hand, no jacket, no plan. I spent the night sitting inside my car in the parking lot with the dome light on, staring up at the 3rd floor window. Nothing moved. No lights, no shadows, just the vent cover, barely visible from outside. I slept in my car for 3 days while trying to find a new place. Maintenance entered the apartment while I was gone. I asked if they heard anything or saw anything unusual. They told me the vent was empty. Just dust, just metal. But then the maintenance guy asked a question that froze my spine. He said, "Did you mean to leave the message on the bathroom mirror?" I hadn't been inside since the night I ran. I asked him, "What message?" He paused. His face lost color. He said it was just one word, "open," written in long, dripping strokes like a finger had dragged through steam. The bathroom was completely dry. Nobody had taken a shower. I moved out that afternoon. But the story doesn't end there, because the second apartment I moved into, a newer place with central air and no old vents, felt safe for exactly 1 week. Then, just after midnight, as I lay half asleep, the heater kicked on with a soft whoosh, followed by a short metallic scrape, then 2 taps on the wall, then a whisper that sounded like it had traveled a very long way through metal ducts that should not connect to anything familiar. "I found you." I shoved my hands over my ears, but the voice slid underneath, closer, now clearer. "I'm already in." I moved again. It followed me. No matter how new the building is, every place has vents. Air has to go somewhere, and it moves through the dark like something carrying a voice that was never meant to leave the walls. Now, every time the fan kicks on, I freeze. Every time the heater hums, I wait. And some nights, Usually around 3:12 a.m., I hear it shifting inside the ductwork, waiting, learning, moving closer to the grate. Sometimes I feel my breath being copied. Sometimes I hear my own voice say something I didn't think. And last night, as I rolled over in bed, I felt a cold exhale brush my ear and a whisper that didn't come from any direction, but from inside the air itself. You sleep so close to the vent. They left the house with a smile and a stack of instructions for me. Feed the cat, water the plants, mail in the packages. They said they'd be gone for the season, maybe longer. The house sat on a small tree-lined street that smelled like old leaves and sun-bleached siding. It was the kind of place people imagined when they thought about quiet weekends and cozy hearths, except for one locked door on the second floor that they called the spare room. They told me not to go in unless I needed an extra towel or a blanket for a guest. That line, "Don't go in unless you need an extra towel," felt like something hiding under polite words. For 2 days, I obeyed. I made coffee in the morning, shuffled newspapers off the porch, and straightened the living room where their photographs hung like quiet witnesses. The house moved softly around me, floorboards protesting in polite groans, the radiator tapping in the night. I kept finding small signs that someone had been here recently. A shoe left near the back door, a knitting basket half-finished on the armchair. It felt lived in a way that wasn't the same as lived in by people who were away. It felt lived in by memory. On the third night, I woke to humming. It was low and tuneless at first, like someone tracing a melody they'd forgotten. It came from the second-floor landing. I padded upstairs in socks to find the spare room's door closed but not latched. The hallway was darker than the rest of the house, and the light from my phone made the banister look like the spine of some sleeping animal. When I stepped closer, the hum stopped. I told myself I'd heard a radio or the television from the room down the street. I told myself too many things. I knocked and heard footsteps on the other side, light, then heavier, like someone settling into a chair, then silence. The door remained closed. I left a note on the mantel anyway. "Hope you're having a great trip. All is well here." I slid the key into the bowl and went to bed. The next morning, a small wooden toy soldier sat on the kitchen table where my note had been. Paint chipped, one ear knocked off. It faced the window as if on guard. There was no note to accompany it, no explanation. I asked the neighbor across the street, older, never without a cardigan, if she'd seen anyone. She shrugged and said the owners were private people with a sad sort of past. She mentioned offhand that the spare room used to be an office for their son decades ago, a son who had stopped leaving one autumn and never came back. I told myself not to be ridiculous. A toy on a table could be anything. An old house collects things. But the soldier kept moving. I put it on the mantel. It reappeared on the bedside table. I left it on the porch. By evening, it had been placed under the spare room door like a sentinel. Each time I moved it, it returned. That week, the house grew quiet in ways that felt deliberate. Curtains twitched when I walked by. I would think of something, a particular audiobook I loved, The Taste of Cereal, and find the exact cereal spoon stacked with a bowl already washed in the sink. Once, I left the porch light on and came back to find it off, and the key gone from the bowl, though the door was still locked from the outside. Nothing seemed broken. Nothing seemed forced. It felt less like the work of someone careless and more like the patience of someone who had been rehearsing movements inside that room for a long time. On Friday, the weather stalled. Rain drew long lines down the windows and the house exhaled the smell of damp wool. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of a chair being gently pulled across wood. The sound came from the spare room. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and walked upstairs. The door was slightly ajar this time, a seam of light cutting the landing in thin gold. I put my hand on the knob and felt it warm. Someone had been there very recently. I pushed the door open and stepped into a room that looked exactly as it had in the photographs on the wall. Small bed with a faded quilt, a single wooden chair by the window, a dresser with an oval mirror, and a nursery shelf. Only the shelf had been cleared of most toys except for a small spot where the soldier might fit. The blanket on the bed was tucked in perfectly. The pillow had an impression like a head had been there not long ago. A faint scent hung in the air, old soap, river mud, something like lemon peel and laundry. I closed the door softly behind me and sat in the chair until morning. I didn't tell anyone. How do you explain a room that seems to fold itself around an absence? I made rational lists in my head. The couple could have returned and been quiet. The owners might have a relative who stopped by. There might be an explanation. The lists were always shorter than the silence. The third week, I found a photograph tucked into the pages of a book on the living room shelf. It was a portrait, a child in a sweater holding a wooden soldier. The child's mouth wasn't smiling, eyes too serious for a small face. The back of the photograph had a date and a single word in shaky ink: home. I kept thinking I would show the photo to someone, but every time I lifted it, a pressure rose in my chest like an unshared grief pressing its weight on me. Then the nights got worse. The hum came more frequent and was joined by whispering. Not words at first, just syllables like a throat practicing speech. My sleep thinned until the morning looked like a photograph I could never quite focus on. Once, in the dark, I heard a small voice say plainly, "Sit." The sound was childish, but that wasn't what unnerved me. It was the tone. Not a command, but an invitation, patient and certain. I began leaving doors unlocked and lights on. I stopped bringing friends over. The house had become smaller. My world contracted to a single staircase and 2 rooms. The toy soldier's guard position bothered me less than the shape of the bed in the spare room. There were nights when I could swear I saw the pillow rise, slow and careful, as if something inside was breathing and reminding itself to be still. One evening, I woke to something heavy leaning on the bedroom door. Not a person, too light for that, but the door bowed inward and a soft thump echoed down the hall, like a palm laid flat and then lifted. The house smelled suddenly of smoke, though no flame burned. The wooden soldier lay at the foot of the bed, facing inward, paint dull. There was a small gingerbread man cookie on the nightstand, stale, sugar half gone. placed where no one had placed it before. I realized with an odd sharpness that this house had rituals. Someone or something made the same careful small gestures again and again, putting the soldier where a hand could reach him, leaving food that went untouched, lulling the house into motion with the same few acts, like a lullaby that had been recorded on a loop and played whenever a particular hour came. It was comforting in a way that sickened me. I started to dream of a river, not the kind on maps. The dream river was small and dark, with a broken dock and a boat tied to it with frayed rope. In the dream, someone sat in that boat, humming the same tune I heard in the spare room. When I would wake up, the house smelled faintly of riverweed. Finally, I could not carry the weight of not knowing. I pulled open the drawer of the dresser and found a stack of letters tied with twine. The top letter was brittle. The ink had bled a little with time. I read the first line and my throat closed. He liked the soldier because it kept still. The letters were full of explanations that weren't explanations, apologies that looped into other apologies, stories that stopped mid-sentence. Toward the bottom of the stack, I found a torn page, a police report with a name redacted and the words, "Last seen on the riverbank," stamped like a headline. That night, the house changed its voice. The humming widened into a lullaby I knew as a child but couldn't name. The spare room door opened on its own. The chair rocked once, twice, and then stopped. The bed seemed to move like a tide. I went in and sat on the foot of it because the alternative was letting whatever was in that mattress settle into its sleeping posture while I watched from across the hall. As I sat, the air grew colder, and the light came from inside the dresser rather than from the window. Thin, pale, like moonlight trapped in paper. A small handprint appeared on the mirror, though nothing had touched the glass. The soldier stood on the pillow now, head cocked like an attentive child. Beneath the soldier, on the quilt, someone had arranged the crumbs of the gingerbread into 2 neat circles. A small voice said, plainly, "Stay." No pleading, no malice, just a certainty like rain. It felt like an offering, like a final alignment of everything in the house toward one very small point: presence. The sensation on my skin was like being measured against the length of something's life. I realized then, with the clarity of someone seeing a photograph develop, that the house had been keeping him, not hiding him, not punishing, keeping. The spare room existed to hold a single shape in place. I left that night. I took the soldier with me and stuffed him into the glove compartment of my car because I did not want to throw him away and I did not want to leave him. When I handed the keys back later, the owners thanked me as if I'd done something insignificant. They did not mention the spare room. They did not ask about the soldier. I drove away with the toy's head bobbing in the dark and a lullaby lodged in the hollow of my ear. Sometimes I imagine the house ticking along, keeping its rituals in the hush of afternoon light. Sometimes I think about the photograph and the polite word on the back, home. The toy soldier sits on my dashboard,
and stares forward as we drive. At night, he seems to tilt his head toward the highway, as if listening for a whistle that only he can hear. I don't know if he's waiting to be taken back. I don't know if he thinks of me as a traveling keeper. I only know that there are houses like that, places that keep a person in the careful way a watch keeps its hands aligned, and that if you stay long enough, the house will try to teach you how to be small enough to fit into that keeping.
The night shift at the low-power emergency radio station was supposed to be forgettable. An hour of paperwork, a pot of bad coffee, and the hum of fluorescent lights until dawn. The building sat behind the volunteer firehouse, a box of a room with one window that looked out at the river and a desk cluttered with aging equipment. Most nights, I read manuals or folded forms while the world outside slept. If something happened, the dispatcher would spring to life and I'd hand off the call. If nothing happened, the tape recorder kept me company. The first unusual thing was a transmission that bled through between static and test tones, soft at first, like someone speaking into a pillow. I scribbled the frequency down, expecting interference from a hobbyist or a trucker running his rig. The voice said nothing but coordinates and one instruction: don't sleep. It was clipped and urgent, the syllables sliding like someone trying not to wake someone else. I forwarded it to the dispatcher, and we sent a team to the trailhead those coordinates matched. They came back 2 hours later with mud on their boots and a shrug. Nothing. A single boot print half sunk at the edge of the trail, and a scrap of blue fabric snagged on a branch, patterned like something from a childhood sweater. I filed it in the log as unresolved and laughed it off because we have to laugh at the things we can't explain or they swallow us. The voice returned over the next few nights. Each call was the same: coordinates, don't sleep, then static and a hum that sounded like breath through a long tunnel. On the fourth night, it changed, briefly, into a humming that matched the lullaby my mother hummed while I wound clockwork toys when I was a kid. I hadn't heard that tune in years. I felt something twist in my chest, like a gear slipping into place. We tried to triangulate. The signal traced back, at times, to a decommissioned relay tower on the edge of town. The tower was canted and rusted, fenced off and labeled as non-operational. I drove out with a coworker one late afternoon and stood beneath its skeletal frame. Up close, it looked like it had been sleeping for decades. No power lines, no active boxes, just pigeon nests and a faded sign. We climbed the access gate because curiosity is a greedy animal. Up top, the metal smelled like rain and old oil. There was nothing there that should have transmitted. When we tuned in, the voice didn't sound like a distant radio. It sounded like someone right next to the mic, close enough to feel the warmth of breath. It said a name I recognized, the radio manager from years ago who collapsed on shift, and then our town's main street in a sequence of phrases that were not possible for a static line. My coworker swore and tuned the dial. The tower offered nothing but wind. After that, sleep stopped being an ally. I started drinking more coffee because it felt like my one sensible act against whatever was scraping at the edges of the night. Weeks passed with only broken nights and a voice that kept learning. It learned what made me uneasy and used it. It learned the shape of my hands when I typed, the way I curse when the coffee is too weak, the exact joke my father used to tell before storms. These were private things, small keys into the locked corners of a person. Hearing them through static felt like an invasion performed with a polite hand. Once, around 3 in the morning, a recording caught something impossible. I was surveilling the channel and had set the recorder to long form. Minutes of static crept by until the recorder captured my voice, delayed and doubled, whispering a sentence I had not spoken. "Go to the river, there's a light." The delay was tiny, less than a second, but the recording included a wet footstep outside the shack 3 seconds before anything actually moved. I walked outside and found a single fresh footprint in the gravel, pointed toward the river. The river is an old place, slow and secretive. Locals tell stories about folks who took walks and never returned, how the water keeps a ledger and lists things in a language no one should read. I don't usually believe those stories. I called it superstition, the way you call things you can't explain harmless. But something about the footprint and the whisper made my palms sweat. I drove to the dock with a flashlight and found a small rowboat tied to the cleat, half submerged and smelling of river rot. Inside the boat lay a notebook. Its pages were water-soft and torn. The last sentence written there, smudged, frantic, read, "I tried to wake him. I think I woke myself." Beneath it were coordinates. Beneath those, in a different hand, the phrase, "Don't sleep." That night, I stayed awake to watch the channels like a guard over graves. The voice shifted. It began to speak not in coordinates, but in memory. It recited the nickname of the old station manager, the exact way he adjusted his hearing aid, the color of the first radio I ever repaired. It knew things I had not told anyone. When it said, "Don't sleep this time," there was a strange tenderness in the delivery, as if the speaker was trying to protect me from something I would only meet when my eyelids closed. At 2:47 a.m., the lights in the shack flickered, and the radio filled with a different sound, a rapid tapping like fingernails on bone. The tapping came from every speaker at once, disorienting as if the sound had no front or back. Then the tape recorder clicked over and held a long, low sound that made my fillings in my teeth ache. It was a voice I thought I knew, mine, saying a name softly, as if apologizing. I had never spoken that name aloud at work. A team from the sheriff's office came and checked the equipment, rubbing the plastic covers and making calls. They found no wiring forced, no foreign transmitters. They laughed, uneasy laughs, and wrote down notes. They found a smear on the console that looked like dried river mud, and a single hair clamped into a screw head like a pin. They told me to go home and sleep. I told them I couldn't. I stayed until sunrise with the recording running, listening to my own silence and trying to convince myself that whatever had stolen the night would not take the day. When I finally slept, it was the thin, tremulous sleep of someone who knows their name is on a list. In the dream, I was standing on the riverbank, a light bobbing a little way out. Someone in the boat hummed. When I woke, my mouth tasted like mud, and the notebook phrase looped in my head. I think I woke myself. I kept thinking of the sentence as if it were a hinge no one wanted to turn. I quit that job 2 days later. It's a simple thing to say in retrospect, but inside the station, the voice seemed to press at the door like someone listening for the click of the latch. Before I left, I cleared the desk, tore the tapes, and wiped fingerprints from the mic. I thought I could exorcise the place with mundane gestures, that cleaning would sever the tether. Then I found a scrap of paper tucked under the recorder, a single line in handwriting I recognized and did not recognize at once, my own scrawl from years ago training at the desk. The line read, "If you ever sleep, listen for the light at the river." I took the scrap and burned it in my kitchen sink, because burning seemed purifying. The smoke from the paper smelled like plastic and old cigarettes and a memory I could not place. That night in my new apartment, the radio was gone, and the tapes were in the trash, and still I could not sleep. The air felt like a mouth around my face. At precisely 3:12 a.m., a notification lit my phone. There was no new message, only a tiny recorded file that had saved itself. I played it with trembling fingers. The last 2 seconds were my voice saying, as a lullaby almost, "Don't sleep." Things started moving in ways that didn't make sense. The light on the river that had been a rumor in my dream became a memory in the back of my head, a faint glow that wavered like a watchman's light miles away, not quite a star. Electronics would blink when I passed. The kettle on the stove would click as if someone else had poured the water. I would wake certain I had spoken, and find a note in my handwriting that I had no recollection of leaving. One morning I found a rowboat key taped under the visor of my car. I did not own a boat. The final thing that convinced me I was not merely terrified, but hunted, happened on an empty Wednesday. I was making coffee when a radio in a neighbor's window crackled to life, an old battery-powered thing that had been silent for years. Through it came a voice that sounded like a chorus of distant breathers, saying coordinates. They matched the notebook. They matched the same spot on the river. Beneath the coordinates came a sound that wrenched my stomach, a wet, childlike laugh, and then very clearly my voice saying, softer than I could bear, I tried to wake him. I drove to the river. The dock light was off, and the boat was gone, but the cleat where a rope would tie was still polished, like it had been used the day before. On the bank lay a scrap of fabric I recognized, blue, flecked with riverweed. I picked it up and it smelled like cigarettes and rain and someone's breath close to mine. The hair still lodged in the screw on the console came loose in my hands like a splinter of identity. I can't tell you exactly when sleep stopped being a refuge and became the thing that handed me over. I can tell you that sometimes now, at night, I hear a whisper through my phone speaker or the vent above the bed, and it says, politely, "Don't sleep." Not like a warning, like a necessary condition, like an instruction from someone who keeps a ledger I did not know I had been entered into. I moved again. I sell radios now, small mundane things with knobs and tidy back panels, and I avoid other people's towers. But every so often, a frequency flickers and a phrase slides through the static that fits into the exact hollow in my chest where the river keeps things. When it says the coordinates, I know I should hang up, block the channel, and forget. But the human part of me leans forward and listens. And in that leaning, I hear my own voice finish the sentence it keeps saying in the dark. I tried to wake him. I think I woke myself. If you work nights and hear a voice on the emergency band telling coordinates and saying don't sleep, I'll be honest, I'd hang up. I would. But if you're anything like me, stubborn, curious, a little tired, you might tune back. If you tune back, listen for the light at the river. If you ever find a boat half submerged and a notebook with that sentence, know this. The worst part isn't that something already woke. The worst part is that whatever woke will try again, softly and patiently, in the shape of a voice that learned how you breathe.